Here we are. It's been raining heavily. Flooding, rain, not good for human beings, not good for agriculture, not good for monoculture, but very good for the environment, very good for the trees and the plants you can see blooming around us. You can hear the birds in the background. So today I want to look at two topics which are interrelated. I want to look at COVID-19 and pharmaceutical patents. Currently, as far as COVID-19 is concerned, in this country, that's Australia, we're alone. Each individual is now responsible for the situation they find themselves in. The state, at the state and federal level in Australia, has washed its hand of its responsibility to continue preventative measures, which means those that are most vulnerable, the elderly and those with multiple comorbidities, are those who are at risk. The young, the fit, children will get sick, but in the majority of cases they won't get very sick. But those that are vulnerable as far as producing antibody responses are in a lot of trouble. We've seen the government make certain decisions for some good reasons. And the first decision the government made is to treat COVID-19 as influenza, as an endemic disease, as a disease that will be with us for generations. And it hopes that by creating mass immunity, that the virulence of the virus will decrease, and those that are most at risk, they will over time be in a position where they're protected by herd immunity. So all the measures that were put in place originally were put in place for one very good reason, because there was no vaccination and there was no treatment. So the only way of dealing with COVID-19 and the only way to not have mass deaths, casualties, as we saw in the United States with over 1 million casualties from COVID-19, I think it's 1.2 million currently. That's 1 in 300. That's 0.3 of the population of the United States died of COVID-19. So the fact is, the government is relying on vaccination and the new antivirals to protect those that are most vulnerable. And it's done two things in order to assist that process, because it's determined that the economy in a private investment for private profit is much, 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 much more important than the health of individuals and the health of the community as far as this current pandemic is concerned. So in order not to frighten the horses, that's you and me, it has stopped publishing admission rates, it has stopped publishing mortality rates, it has removed all restrictions as far as COVID-19 is concerned, except in some specialised health institutions. So you can catch COVID-19, and as far as the government is concerned, you can go about your business, don't even have to wear a mask, and you can freely infect your fellow citizens, all legal. So what are the things that have been put in place? One is vaccination. Vaccination has been freely available now for some time. Some people like myself, who fall in the elderly category, have now had 4 vaccinations. About 60% of Australians have had 3 vaccinations, and I think about 90% 2 vaccinations, and about 90% 1 vaccination. So that's one way of dealing with a problem when the issue is endemic. And the next way of dealing with the problem is medication, antivirals. To privately owned pharmaceutical juggernauts have now produced antivirals, one much better than the other. And the government has gone, that's the federal government on your behalf, taxpayer, has gone into a business arrangement with these pharmaceutical companies. Now currently the most popularly used antiviral, and in my opinion the most effective, is a 40 capsule dose. And you take 4 capsules twice a day for 5 days. And it's very effective. But because of the cost, and the cost that these privately owned pharmaceutical companies, which have a patent on this particular medication, and that means they've got an exclusive right worldwide to produce this medication for the next 25 years without any competition. And the whole concept of a patent is that it allows a private corporation to invest money knowing that if they come up with the goods, they'll be able to make extraordinary profits for the next 25 years. And that encourages them to invest. Well, that's the philosophy behind it. Now, medications, pharmaceutical companies don't really make much of a profit from vaccination, because that's a once-in-a-yearly affair. They do make their profits from medications that people need to use on a daily basis, or regularly, or intermittently, which they have an exclusive worldwide patent. And this worldwide patent is recognised by almost every sovereign nation state in the world, I think, except North Korea. The much maligned North Koreans don't recognise the patent laws. But every other nation state recognises, and those of you who are old enough will remember with AIDS, how difficult it was, although tens of thousands were dying in South Africa and in the African continent and around the world from AIDS, for these governments, for these private corporations to allow governments to produce medications to save their population. And we see this on a regular basis. Now, the fascinating thing about these antivirals, now if you're not on any type of social security benefit, you get COVID-19 and you're elderly, that's over 70, or you have multiple disabilities, you are eligible for an antiviral. It's quite easy to obtain. You don't even have to go to the doctor. You can do a telehealth consultation. The doctor can send a script to your local pharmacy. You put a script on your phone. But the catch is that although you pay $45.80, you, the taxpayer, the federal government, pays $1,105 per 40 capsules. That's $27.50 for every capsule you take. And as you need to take 4 twice a day, so every time you put those 4 capsules in your mouth, that's about $104. Now obviously, most governments around the world do not have the resources to pay $1 billion, which the Australian government will do, for 1 million courses of treatment. And that's the key. $1 billion for 1 million courses of treatment. Now, to a significant degree, we find ourselves in this situation because governments around the world, sovereign nation states, have given up their responsibility to produce medications for their people. In Australia in the mid-80s, the Paul Keating Labor government privatised Commonwealth Serum Laboratory for the brilliant price of about $285 million. It's now worth over $1 trillion. Privatised it. A company that had been created in 1911 by the Labor government, the first Labor government in the world, in order to provide vaccinations for Australians. That company was privatised. And around the world we have seen government-owned pharmaceutical corporations privatised. This gives the privately owned pharmaceutical juggernauts a monopoly on the creation of new medications, and that monopoly is reinforced by the patents they hold. And nothing highlights this more than the fact that for 40 capsules of an antiviral, you, the taxpayer, and if you don't pay income tax, you are still a taxpayer. Doesn't matter how young you are, you pay goods and services tax on goods and services, and most people around the world pay goods and services tax. You are subsidising these pharmaceutical giants. To rub salt into the wound, the fact is that most people around the world, most of the 7.8 billion people on this planet, will never have access to these antivirals because of the cost involved and because of this 25-year patent. Most likely in 25 years, we won't need a COVID-19 antiviral treatment. We may need an antiviral treatment for something else, and they've created a new patent. And what makes things really, really, as I said, rub salt into the wound, is the fact that these private corporations use research results which are created by publicly owned institutions and universities to produce these medications they have a patent on for the next quarter of a century. That's right, a quarter of a century. And we see this not just with COVID-19, but many of the so-called new anti-cancer drugs, hypertension, cholesterol, diabetes, and the list goes on and on. So these private corporations who have these patents then have a superhighway to sovereign nation states' treasuries around the world. So it's all very well for me to complain about the situation, but to a significant degree, we as a society, we as a people, have allowed this to occur in every aspect of our lives during the last 40 years, during the privatisation, globalisation, corporatisation, deregulation tsunami which has swept across us. Whether it's access to healthcare, where the whole point about introduction of Medicare was to make healthcare a right, not a privilege, and now we are seeing that turned on its head. Access to housing for a strong, viable public housing sector. Access to the financial sector. Access to ports, airports. Access to essential services, electricity, gas, water. And the list goes on and on. Over the last 40 years, we have allowed this situation to occur because we believed as a people, not me, not you, but as a people, we believed that privatisation, globalisation, corporatisation and deregulation would benefit us. Not only has it created a situation where essential services and basic services are no longer available to people, now it's also created a situation where we have an increasing gap between the rich and the poor. We see the billionaire club grow and grow in number, and the multi-billionaire club grow and grow in number, while those at the other end of the scale grow in number. For example, 1% of the population owns 50% of the resources of the world. 50% of the world's population owns 1% of the resources of the world. And we have allowed this to occur because we have believed in this new religion. A religion based on an ideology that revolves around private investment for private profit. a religion which allows the private sector the power to avoid paying income tax and taxes. A religion which sees us beg and beseech at their table in order to be thrown a few corporate crumbs. And the list goes on and on. And the pharmaceutical patents highlight how ridiculous the situation has come. Because the knowledge they use to create those medications which they have patents for is knowledge which is created by the public sector. The privatisation of publicly owned entities which were financed through the blood, sweat and tears of generations of Australians has created this situation. And to make matters worse, we are now seeing the development of a worldwide political movement which is in its essence a reactionary, racist, misogynist, hate-filled movement based on disinformation and lies, because those sections of the population which relied on the state, especially in the Western world, to give them access to the basic necessities of life, to ensure that their children could be educated, no longer exist. All the major political parties now bow at the altar of Mammon, the private investment for private profit mob. Every minute of every day they worship Mammon. The fact that they've removed even mask mandates in this country and even mandates for people with COVID-19 not to mix in the community for a few days highlights how entwined our political system has become with the private investment for private profit mob. So you do have options. You can join the hate mongers that based their political ideology and philosophy on disinformation and lies. You can support governments around the world who kowtow to the private sector and allow patents to exist which deny people some of the most basic fundamentals as far as healthcare is concerned. Or you can be involved in a new political movement. It's actually not a new political movement, it's an old political movement. A political movement that believes that democracy is not about representation, but about direct democracy. Democracy is rule of the people, by the people, for the people. We have no democratic society in this country, on this planet is democratic. They are all now part and parcel of a corporate governance which is based on sovereign nation states abrogating their responsibility to their citizens, whether they're dictatorships, whether they're parliamentary democracies. They've abrogated their responsibilities to their citizens as far as essential services is concerned, and they have joined the privatisation, deregulation, corporatisation, privatisation mob. So think about it. I mean, the idea of these short talks is to throw new light on issues which face each and every one of us every day. If we don't have any discussion, there are no solutions. It's not about action for action's sake. It's about discussion to create pathways to find solutions to the situation we find ourselves in 2022. A world which is bedevilled by increasing population growth, limited resources, increasing CO2 emissions, and the domination of the economy on this planet by a private investment for private profit mantra, which creates which creates profits irrespective of the human, social and environmental costs.